initially I was thinking what connections I have that have kind of negotiation skills, but instead I felt I could just reach out to someone perhaps that's really a pro at it. And I saw on your profile you have like over 30 years of experience. You know, you like retired as the lead hostage negotiator. So I felt that your profile was really honestly perfect to interview, to kind of learn more about what you do, how you do it, and maybe share some stories or some skills. In terms of preparing for a negotiation, how important do you think it is, and what sort of like tools and techniques do you typically use when you know you have a negotiation coming up?
So, for me, planning and preparation is massive, right? It's part of being professional that you plan and prepare as best you can before first contact, right? Because you always know that every plan, almost every plan doesn't survive first contact with the enemy, right? So, but if you go in with no plan, of course I can wing it, but I always choose never to do that, right? I always try and give myself a bit of a plan, bit of a strategy, some tactics maybe reviewed before we engage, in the full knowledge that it'll change, because negotiation is not a linear process, right? When you're teaching it, we teach it as a linear process, but in actual fact, it's about how you engage the other side, because really you don't know what you're going to engage. You don't want to make too many assumptions because you can get them wrong. So really it's about evaluating and constantly re-evaluating and pivoting from your original perspective based on your engagement with other people, right? And not just what's said, the way that it's said. So for me, I would research the people, I would research the company, the background, in the corporate world, the contracts, all of that, to gain as much knowledge as I can before I engage. In the world of hostage negotiation, or in the world, as a negotiator, if I go to the edge of a bridge for someone contemplating suicide, or you go to a siege, there's virtually no planning you can do, right? You can be told some data, you'll get some facts. The guy's name is John Smith, aged 42, lives in flat 3/2, and he's had a fight with his wife, mother, father, something, right? But you usually go in with almost nothing. So my background means that gathering information before I make judgments is a critical part of the negotiation. So not just the early phase, I'm constantly looking to reevaluate my information, update my assessment of patterns. So planning is important, but recognizing that in high pressure, high stakes hostage negotiations, you sometimes, quite often, don't get that. But at least if you have a process in your mind and you know that you're trying to glean information rather than be desperate to say, please just let the person go. Please let the person go, right? Because you would expect that's in your mind. So that has to be the voice in the back of your mind. That cannot be at the forefront. So for me, yeah, it's a very important part. I teach like an A to Z process. I give everyone this process. It's called I Resolved. And the I in I Resolved is information gathering.
So how exactly do you balance those maybe sometimes conflicting interests from different stakeholders? Like, especially like in hostage situations where you balance the government, the family, the criminals?
Well, for a start, they're in an order of priority, right? For me, it's easy. I go, the hostages first, number one. Everyone else comes second to that. Then there's the family, then there's the government, all of these different parties. Now we engage them all. We try and understand what they need out of the deal, right? Because everyone needs something out of the deal. And if we can find a way to chart a path where everyone gets a little bit of what they need, everyone can't get everything, right? We've always got to compromise on something. So we start to trade on what's valuable for them. And like most people, they will say, I need A, right? But in actual fact, they just want A. They don't need A. They might need B or C or D. So my job is to ignore what they're demanding or saying they need and figure out what they actually need. And so in a negotiation, typical example, you know, a good way to illustrate that would be if a hostage taker in a bank robbery asks for a helicopter or a getaway car. Get me a getaway car. Now, if I start to react to that because that's what they've told me literally they want, I'm in the wrong conversation because I have to interpret that dialogue in the context of the whole scenario. And I can reframe that back to them and say, sounds to me like you're in a tough situation that you just need out of. Yes. So then we've got a million ways to achieve that and not just one. So the way that we can achieve a goal for them, in the moment, they can only think of one way to achieve it. But when we start to negotiate, as we search for hidden value, there's many ways to achieve that goal. Same thing, right?
So we're being taught a little bit about concessions, and part of the theory is that you should start with smaller concessions and then eventually build, because if you essentially give up a really big concession, they're going to expect bigger concessions. How do you typically deal with concessions and negotiations? Like, what would your suggestion be? Like, are there some negotiations where you don't at all want to offer any, or is it like you just said, where perhaps it's reshaping what they want into a concession you can give?
Yeah, well, I suppose that's probably closer to what I would try and do. If your opponent is expecting those concessions, then sometimes that's the game that you have to play, but I try to take them out of that game. So I know that people teach that, give small concessions. But for me, it's more important to trade something which is high value to you or high value to them, but low cost to you, right? So I don't have a problem giving concessions or compromise. It's trade, right? We're trading something. And we might be able to trade something that has got no value to us, but really important to them. You know, as an example, very often arresting someone at a siege or when they're about to give up from an armed robbery, they demand, I want my lawyer here before I give up. Now, normally, we don't allow the lawyer access to a scene because then they become a witness and they can't represent their client. But sometimes we can just say, let's just do it, right? Because actually the guy just needs reassurance that we're not going to beat him up or shoot him or assault him and all of that. And so let's worry about that problem that we've helped create. We'll worry about that tomorrow. So for me, I'm not really one for being strict and stern and bold in that position that I take, because when you play that card, there's nowhere to go. You can't come down from it, right? So it's, for me, I'd rather get to a reasonable solution. So yeah, if I'm up against a bad faith actor who's making outrageous demands that are not credible, then I don't want to haggle with them up, down, up, down, up, down. What I'll do is I'll destabilize them and remove their power by other means.
How do you
Right?
do that?
That's the $1 million
Yeah.
question, right? Well, listen, that's the skill set, right? So what I would do with them, when you're engaged in a dialogue, let's just say you ask me a question, right? You just did there. How do you do that, right? That tells me that that's a bit of gold dust for you. That's an important thing. So you've told me what you really want to know. Now, if I was to give you the secrets for that in negotiation, you'd be like, well, I would do almost anything for that information. That would be great, right? So I then know that I can manipulate you based on what your need is, right? So when they're asking me 4 and 5 and 6 questions, I don't ask them questions in return. I just evaluate the 6 questions that they ask and look for the patterns. And the patterns tell us what their needs are, and we can then squeeze their Achilles heel on those needs to say you want A, but you really want B. I know you really want B. Let me help you get that. So I do that in a collaborative way rather than a manipulative way.
Right.
Right. But it's the same skill set. But for me to operate with integrity, I'm not a sociopath or a narcissist. I won't behave that way, and my company won't behave that way. So we'll just frame it in a way that says everyone can win from this.
How do you manage your emotions in negotiations?
Right. So think about it. You can be triggered by people, right? And the more you're exposed to that red button, the better you are at controlling that, right? So clearly when I said something about Canada, it's something that you've been exposed to many times before, right? And so you've built up a resilience to that type of comment or insult, right?
Right.
So it's the same thing. If I was to call you pretty or ugly or say you're a shit negotiator and you're like, it's a bit insulting, right? Or Trump insults Zelensky, right? You see Zelensky as like, it's fine.
It's cool as a cucumber.
Yeah, because
it's
expected.
Normal,
right? It's normal. And so, because for me, here's the context of Zelensky. So I was speaking at the Doha Forum about 2 months ago. And I was on stage and an ambassador asked me this question. He said, how can you negotiate with the Russians when they just tell lies, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to change the context so we don't become politicized here. But let me tell you something. Why are you so upset at someone telling you lies when the same people are bombing and killing your people? So telling you a lie on the spectrum is tiny compared to what they're doing, right?
Right.
So the way that people make you feel is insignificant. So when you minimize the fact that people are poking and prodding and trying to get a response from you, if you make yourself, I'm not that important, you won't react as much. The other thing that we do is, so as a young pop, I recognized that I had to manage my emotions, right? And your emotions come from how you feel, but also they come from your values as a human being. And so I used to get really angry when I was arresting and interviewing pedophiles and wife beaters. Because for me, a man protects kids and women, doesn't harm them. And here's this guy sitting in front of me who does that. And one of the older cops said to me, you can't come in the room because you're going to get in the way of the objective. And the objective is to get this guy relaxed and get an admission from him. And he won't be relaxed if he's sitting opposite you and your face is red with anger. So you have to learn to control that, right? So the way that I control that is to be exposed to those types of people over and over again so that eventually it becomes normal, right? But also, if I understand my red button, understanding why you feel so passionately about that helps you manage it, because you can say, yeah, so my values are really strong, my emotions are really strong in the context of being a young man in Scotland. But actually, in the context of an interviewer, that's a maladaptive behavior. That's bad.
Right.
So it's like, so I don't have to be the tough guy because that's just stupid. When I was 16, it was important to be the tough guy who protected women and never harmed kids. But that's this context. But in a different context, it's stupid. And let's just say I'm out with my wife for dinner tonight and someone bumps into me and I punch him in the face. When I was 18 years old, that would be entirely acceptable.
In your head.
Yeah. But right now, I know it would be stupid. She would leave me, right? She'd be like, "What are you doing? I'm not hanging around with you. You're a lunatic."
Yeah.
So the context of that behavior changes, and as long as you understand that it's okay to, you feel really passionate about something in the context of that, But in this different context, it's okay to be different, right? It's okay, but you need to practice, right? So I had to be in front of these people 4, 5, 6, 10 times before I understood the game and I could fit in with the game. I could adapt. So the key for me is for me to adapt to them, not expect them to adapt to me. I don't need you to be nice to me.
Mm-hmm.
Zelensky doesn't need Trump to be mannerly. He doesn't need JD Vance to be kind.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he's been dealing with assholes for the last 20 years. He's been dealing with insults. He's dealing with people who are killing his people. So that little insult is trivial to him. But for
Right.
those of us watching on TV, we're like, that's terrible. That's not professional. That's not diplomatic. And he's like, I don't need diplomacy. I'm just here
Mm-hmm.
to achieve a goal.
Right. Yeah, like an objectivity.
Yeah.
And knowing, okay, well, my goal is this. Like it may, yeah, it's interesting because if you go in with my goal is to arrest this individual, it's counter my values. So therefore, I need to manage my emotions. Then you can at least keep the value within yourself, but manage the emotions.
So
Interesting.
I love this. Yeah, I feel like we're gonna, because we want to like summarize the learning from this call, it probably will be called like science versus art of negotiations, because we dived into so many topics that we haven't really talked about in class, such as specifically like how do you handle your own emotions and the whole like emotions management within the conversation, which is so interesting. And I wonder, like, maybe unless Natasha also has like the last question, but to put like a bow tie on this, you have taught negotiations, and now we're talking about like the art of negotiations. What is like one theory component that comes to mind that you see that is like you need to go like another way in real life? Like in theory, you learn this, but in real life, it's not how it works. Like, are there some of them that
every time, honestly, every time. So if you think about in negotiations, people say, you've been taught this, right? You either anchor low or you anchor high, you have a BATNA, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. Sometimes that's just stupid, right?
All right, tell us.
Right? Sometimes if you anchor high, you just look stupid. It's not credible, right?
Yeah.
So why would you do that?
Yeah.
So when you're in school, you learn almost like an idiot's guide, right? But we should take that with a pinch of salt and say, I'm going to apply my own intuition, my own experience, my expertise, and I'm going to change that. So when I hear negotiating people teaching, always do that, never do that, I'm like, never say no. I'm like, that's stupid advice. Sometimes you might need to say no and, never compromise. Never, of course you need to compromise. Don't be stupid, right? The reality is in the real world, if you never split the difference, right, and you never compromise, sometimes you're going to end up with zero.
Right.
If you do it, if you've got that philosophy against someone with more power, you just end up with zero. That would be stupid. So the rules that you have there, the rules of negotiation are there are no rules. Right?
Yeah.
For me, yeah, it's just there's lots of tactics, there's lots of philosophy, there's lots of learning. Of course, if you have a process, you'll not stray too far from the path. But actually, there's nothing in my experience to beat your own life experience to give you some guidance, right? Because actually, for me, my intuition will be tingling about something. I'll validate it before I act on it, but very often we'll do things that's not in the book.
Right.
What book, right? Because if everyone's read the same book, we cancel each other out, right?
Exactly. And to give credit to our prof, he really does teach it more like an art. Like he says, this is the science. It works most of the time based on the science, but of course, there's always going to be edge cases that you can't apply those things. I really appreciate everything you've shared with us. I think we're going to write a really interesting paper.
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so
Kirk.
much.
Okay,
All
cheers.
right.
Good luck.